long story short, Horizon Forbidden West is a fantastic game with a lot of issues that just don't make any sense. This is going to be a critique of the entire base game. We're not going to discuss the DLC at all, and it will include spoilers. This isn't meant to be a story recap or anything, but I will discuss relevant plot points if it's necessary to get a point across. Additionally, we're going to discuss the things the game did right, the things the game did wrong, but I don't really like to offer a complaint without a solution, so we'll also talk about some things that I would change to improve the game. I started the game on Ultra Hard. I didn't know what I was doing, but normally I play these types of games on the hardest difficulty I can. Well, little did I know that that would end up being a huge mistake. Unfortunately, I didn't come to the conclusion until I was about 40 hours into the playthrough. I arrived at this arena, and the arena is timed, and it also had an entry fee that started at 100 shards, which is the in-game currency. Meanwhile, I only had about 4,000 total shards. So at this point, I knew there was no way I was going to be able to complete these challenges under those types of conditions, and there was a lot of other things starting to crop up, like my ammo economy was getting really bad. I knew that I was running low on materials, and because the encounters were just so long on that difficulty, it was taking me a long time to kill enemies, which then consumed most of my ammo, and I knew I was just running up on this period of an unreasonable grind. I'll totally admit this is just due to my lack of knowledge with the game. I didn't really know how to handle certain things, but I decided to bail out and go back and do the game on one difficulty lower, which is very hard. Shockingly, very hard almost seemed like a joke in comparison to ultra hard. I was smoking every encounter like I was Goku after practicing at 100 times gravity. It was just, I was an unstoppable force at this point. So, I looked it up later, not knowing what I had gotten myself into, and apparently Ultra Hard is a mode that got added to the game after the game came out. I think I kind of picked the wrong mode there unknowingly, but this is a critique against the game, and I will say that it was a bit ridiculous that I was able to pick Ultra Hard right out of the gate, and I didn't get any sort of warning that was telling me that I probably shouldn't do that. At the same time, this also goes to show how much I was enjoying the game, that even after being 40 hours in, I was willing to restart it. Let's start with the positives. The game looks incredible. I don't think anyone is going to complain about how this game looks. There are constant moments where the game puts you into these beautiful vantage points where you can see across far and wide. There are different environments like snow or desert, and there's even some weather effects like snowstorms and rain, as well as the day and night cycle. Some of the lip syncing on the dialogue is insanely well done.
You were among the enemy. What more is there to know?
Why did you do it?
Dork, Jiroka, Makalo, and the Karja pushed into the desert to raid our people.
There are a lot of little emotional and atmospheric moments scattered about the world and through the story. There's this one part where some robots were going through a rebooting process, and they started to produce this noise. Well, there's a tribe that's nearby that has music as a large part of their tribal culture. So as the robots start to make this noise, the tribes start mimicking the sounds, which makes it out like the tribe and the robot are singing to each other. I know this moment may not be inspiring to everyone, but it felt very real. It felt like whoever worked on this part actually understood how to do some serious world building without over-exaggerating anything. This feels like something that would actually happen, you know? Additionally, the voice actors did a killer job. It's pretty rare that any of the primary cast sound out of place. Every now and then, some of the other side characters and stuff are a little off.
Blazes! How are we going to take that thing down?
The main cast just absolutely kills it. They sound super smooth, they sound like they're really engaged and connected with their roles. It's not hammed up or anything, and they match that personality that they're trying to portray very well. Aloy genuinely reminds me of Commander Shepard.
Your sacred cave. There's something inside I need.
I mean, she's very intelligent, but not over the top. She's got a good presence in dialogue where she seems like she's taking control, but it's not so hammed up that you feel like it's a little too ridiculous for her character.
No more politics.
Another person that I really enjoyed was Zoe. and she has a lot of dialogue that just sounds very sincere and genuine. She's got a bit of a motherly tone.
When I was a child, there was always enough to eat. The land gods provided for us, and every season we celebrated them. My happiest memories come from those times. Do you really think we can bring them back?
We'll make it happen.
Thank you, Aloy.
It's really well done, not just in the dialogue itself, but also in the performance. Enemy variety is awesome. There are probably 50-ish different enemy types, but each one can have multiple variants that change what they do. Generally speaking, the variants are just tougher, but some have different elemental types or different components that they may carry. What makes this so cool is that each of the enemies have a different approach to their fight. They may have different weak points that you need to shoot, or they may have a casing that you need to knock off to get to the weak point. This kind of makes it into a little mini-game. Sure, if you want to, you can just shoot the enemy until they die, but you could also focus on a particular weak point to either disable an enemy ability or to knock off a component that you need to collect. For example, if an enemy has a big gun on its back, you can actually shoot that gun off the enemy and either destroy it, or you can knock it off, and oftentimes you can actually pick this gun up and use it. Now, although each individual variant of the enemy variety is cool, the enemies themselves are different enough alone to be an interesting element of combat. Each enemy can serve a particular role in a fight. For example, you'll have some units that are just kind of tankier that stand in front of you and take a lot of damage, but meanwhile there will be aerial units that'll only fly and they'll just try to pick you off from a distance. There are also even some support units that will throw down little beacons that can shoot out bolts of healing energy to the enemy units, and they'll even disrupt your ability to use your heads-up display in the game. Some of the units are actually cargo carriers that will have a container on them, where if you shoot the particular components that's holding the container, you can knock the container free and loot the contents. But if you play this incorrectly, the container can be destroyed, so if you shoot it too much, or even if an enemy hits the container after it's been detached, it can still be destroyed. A common enemy component you'll run into are these little elemental canisters. This early game enemy, the bristleback, has acid canisters attached to its back. If you have an acid-based weapon and you shoot those canisters, the canister detonates. This is a pretty common system through the game where some damage type will match a component on an enemy, which you can then detonate to damage nearby enemies or even yourself if you're too close. The weapon variety reminds me of Ratchet and Clank. You have bombs, bows, throwing spears, and there are a few other exotic weapons like a disc launcher and a rapid-fire crossbow. Most enemies have damage type weaknesses, and your weapons come with predetermined elements that they can deal, like a bow might have fire and electricity, while a spear might have something like explosive and impact. The weapon types can't change what elements they have, so you end up having to completely replace the weapon. There's one weapon that can attach elemental canisters to the side of enemies. You just pull this out, shoot the enemy, the canister is attached to them, and then you pull out the corresponding element and shoot the canister to detonate it. This is a really satisfying weapon comboing system, and there are some other examples of this as well. For example, the crossbow, that's the rapid-fire variant, is called a bolt caster. It has an ability to fire off the entire magazine from start to finish. The problem is that the duration of this attack is too long to hold still and sit there firing while you're fighting the enemy. So you use something else like another weapon's electricity ammo to stun the enemy, and then you can sit there and mag dump with the bolt caster. As you travel around, you'll run into wandering enemy fights, and it's pretty cool running into that because it once again makes this world feel pretty real. You'll just stumble upon groups of enemies fighting each other, or some random tribesmen fighting a machine, and they'll call for your help and you can jump in and start fighting any of the hostiles. There are 3 ground mounts in the game and 1 flying mount. The 3 ground mounts all function a little differently. One of them is a boar, and it scrounges around and forages for materials when it's idle. It's not that big of a deal, but it's pretty cool that when you walk around in Quest, if you walk back to where you left your mount, there's materials on the ground to loot. You know, it's nothing game-breaking, but it's cool how it reacts differently based on which mount you have. The flying mount is able to actually grab you from mid-air. And I thought this was really cool the first time I saw it. The animation was really neat. So if you jump off a cliff or something, you can just hit the call mount button, and the mount will snatch you right out of the air before you fall. As you explore, you'll run across these machines called tall necks that are kind of towering over the landscape, and you can access them to gain some ability to remove some fog of war from the map so that you can kind of see what landmarks and things are out there in the area that you're in. The tall necks are scattered about. In the first one that I saw, you had to solve a little puzzle where you climbed a radar dish to get to it. I was a bit worried that it was going to feel very samey, and every tall neck was going to be kind of this very similar solution of I just got to climb something tall. But I was actually really surprised at how well they designed different ways for you to have to engage with the tall neck. Every single one of them has a different little puzzle that you have to solve. So for example, that first one was a radar dish that I needed to climb. The second one that I did, I actually needed to use some anchors to drag it down to the ground so that I could climb on top of it. Now let's talk about some of the major negatives this game has. A lot of these things just don't make sense to me from the perspective of game design, and I'm kind of baffled that these people made such a good element of this game with things like combat, design of the enemies, and the exploration, and that these same people were involved with these negatives. I genuinely believe this game was made by two different groups of people, where you had some people who just did not know what they were doing, and you had other people who were super in tune with the game. Otherwise, I just don't see how they couldn't recognize that these things are humongous problems. First of all, Aloy never shuts up. She talks non-stop.
I can't find it underwater. I have to sneak past it. The scout might give me some cover. Looks like I can swim down from here.
One of the things I love about fantasy settings is that you don't have someone talking in your ear the entire time over a radio or a transmitter or a communicator or whatever they want to call it. But the problem is that Aloy fills that void herself. There's no one else with her, but she will talk non-stop. There's so much talking going on that at times her dialogue will literally overlap with a cutscene.
I definitely don't
Her
sound
life
like
is not
Rose.
ours to take.
Maybe if I
You may
follow
enter,
their tracks, I can
but
find
mind
out
our
where they're headed.
ways.
Or you'll just have back-to-back moments where the same thing is said repeatedly.
You'd likely find one in a scrounger pile.
Grab a metal panel from the scrounger pile.
Unfortunately, later in the game, she does get digitally connected to the other teammates, and they all start talking, so even while you're away, you now have that voice in your ear.
Whoa! Gonna have to get used to that. That's you, Aloy?
Yeah.
That just really takes me out of the immersion, and I wish they wouldn't have done that. Another problem is that there's no auto sprint on keyboard. If you're playing with a controller, apparently it works, but on keyboard, you have to hold down the sprint key for the entire time that you're playing. This may not seem like that big of a deal, but the problem is that there's no reason to not sprint, so you just hold it down the whole time. I would get it if there was some sort of resource that you needed to spend in order to sprint, but you can sprint freely in this game forever. What makes it even worse is that the sprint key is the same button as your concentration key, which is the ability you use to slow down time while you're aiming. So almost the entire time you're playing the game, you are holding down the sprint key. I'm not even exaggerating when I feel like I have pulled a muscle in my pinky because I've non-stop held down shit from the time I started this game until the time I finished this game. There's an upgrade material called Green Shine. It's scattered about the environments and you'll collect it as you run around. The problem is you don't know whether this resource is finite. If you're like me and you save all the big consumables until you beat the game, then this resource becomes a burden. Eventually, I had enough stockpile that I did a few upgrades, but even towards the end of the game, I realized that I did not have enough of the Green Shine to upgrade everything that I had. I know that there's more out there, but it's the point that it feels really punishing to not know how much there is, and to not have some sort of reassurance by something like a vendor that lets me know that I'll eventually be able to obtain an infinite amount later. I think Green Shine should be reworked into unlocking the tiers of weapon sets. For example, if I use Green Shine on a bow, then it will allow me to upgrade all bows to level 2. That way I don't feel punished for using the Green Shine on a bow that I may not use later in the game. I think this actually works with the already existing game mechanics, because upgrading materials on the weapons should be from machine components, and you can reliably obtain those whenever you need them. There are too many buttons that do too many tasks. For example, left click has so many functions that it becomes difficult to make the game do what you actually want it to do. Whenever you're in a fight, left click will melee, but it will also critical strike. You can only critical strike when an enemy is stunned, but some of the melee combos are quite long, and it feels like the best time to use them would be when an enemy is stunned. Because of the button overlap, you can't reliably combo when an enemy is stunned, because the game will prioritize using critical strike. This problem ripples into other aspects of the game, because now you have to ask yourself, if I can't execute the combo, what's the point in spending the skill points on those skills? In addition to specific buttons performing too many tasks, some of the controls are ridiculously clunky. There are these weird delays between specific inputs. Like after you perform a critical strike on an enemy, there's a second after where you can't draw your bow. So if you try to draw and shoot your bow too quickly, you'll accidentally do a melee attack. Another problem is reloading the bolt caster. The bolt caster can only be reloaded when it's drawn, but the hotkey for reload is the same as using your consumable. So if you don't have the bow fully drawn when you press the reload key, Aloy will instead consume an item. There's one weapon, the disc launcher, that needs an upgraded crosshair. The problem with this weapon is that the crosshair shows that the weapon is primed for its full charge, even though it's not. It doesn't match the spin-up amount, which means that if you don't really recognize this, and you're not paying attention to the sound, you may not realize that this weapon actually isn't performing at its full duty. This game, on PC especially, is a technical mess. There are a ton of small glitches and bugs that pop up. You know, there will be an occasional cutscene where there's somebody like fading in and out of the background, and, you know, it is what it is, little graphical glitches. But I've had whole quests require me to kill some enemies in a specific area, and then suddenly the quest won't progress even though all the enemies are dead. I had one where I accidentally summoned my mount, and the mount got the killing blow on the last enemy, and then that was it. The quest just didn't go anywhere from there. Enemies will just bug out and do nothing. Sometimes you get into an encounter, you can even hit the enemy and walk away, and they'll just stand there, they'll do nothing. I had this one where I was fighting a bear on the side of a cliff. I stabbed him, I walked away, he just stood there and did nothing for the rest of the encounter. I ended up having to provoke him later by attacking him. I had another situation where a companion died, and normally they kind of auto-revive after so much time goes by, but she died while she was climbing on a rock. So for some reason she wouldn't self-revive, and I could just see her hanging from this rock. I was able to go over there and revive her, and that restored her functionality back. One of the final bosses of the game is just a 1v1 versus a human, and I literally stun-locked him to death. He did not attack a single time. I literally just kept attacking, and as long as I kept doing melee attacks, this guy did nothing for the entire duration of the fight. I just beat the heck out of him. Cutscenes are super laggy. If there's any sort of excessive movement going on during a cutscene, it is going to lag like crazy. I had another moment where the NPCs kept talking about a snowstorm. They kept saying there was a snowstorm and it was real bad, everything's going to be terrible, and there was even a line from Aloy about I needed to use my focus, which is the interface, to see better. But there was no snowstorm going on the screen. So suddenly I died, and then when I respawned, it all made sense. The weather effects were restored, and suddenly, now there's a big storm. Shaders will compile just out of nowhere, which is really unfortunate when you're in kind of a cinematic moment in the game. So, for instance, I talked about no load screens. Yeah, there aren't load screens, but there is shader compiling that'll happen. And even though it's rather quick, it's still just a little jarring to have a cool moment broken up by a quick black screen, even if it's only for a second. And this often happened when you were gliding. Here I am jumping off the top of a mountain, and boom, it's got to compile the shaders right as I jump. To me, very hard is way too easy in comparison to ultra hard, and this kind of revealed an issue with the difficulty levels of the game. Ultra Hard is punishing because as soon as you engage in a fight, enemies will aggro from all the way across the map. You're instantly being tackled by all types of enemies. You're one-shot by almost every ability. But what Ultra Hard did was it forced me to use a variety of weapons to their fullest in order to try to get the full potential of what Aloy can do in the middle of a fight. Very Hard, on the other hand, is still so much easier than Ultra Hard that you're able to almost completely kill an enemy before they can even fight back. If you have something like the Boltcaster leveled up, you can just use that rapid fire ability and destroy an enemy before they can do anything. This difference is so dramatic that it means that when you're playing Very Hard or any of the easier difficulties, you're not really encouraged to explore a variety of weapons, which I think is pretty unfortunate. I feel like there's a better balance they can strike between Very Hard seeming a little too easy and Ultra Hard being so oppressive that it feels unfair. For example, at the beginning of the game, they have these enemies called Scroungers. They're like some of the first enemies that you encounter, and they have an AoE attack. This AoE attack just creates this deceitful hitbox, and it makes it difficult for a new player to learn what the proper dodge periods are against these enemies. What's so weird about this is that later, a lot of enemies don't seem to have this problem, but one of the first enemies you encounter do. So it's very easy for you to die to this enemy, and it doesn't even seem like you should have died. There's not enough room for you to be able to learn the game early on, and this problem is compounded at the higher difficulties. There are meals in the game that you can buy from vendors based on ingredients, mostly animal meat, that you've gathered. They are way too expensive. It's almost like the devs knew this though, because the only meal that has no ingredient requirement costs way too much currency. It is too tedious to deal with this mechanic, and I'd be hard-pressed to believe that most players engage with the meals at all. I think they should rework this so that the food can be entirely made from the plants that you gather. This will make it to where when you do basically exploration, you can provide your meals without having to go out of your way to hunt the meat that's involved. But this leads to another problem. Your bag can only hold so many materials. There's also a limit on how many meals you can carry. The amount of ingredients you can carry never exceeds the amount of meals you can make, which means that you will always only be able to fill up the bag to the exact amount of meals that you could potentially create. You're not going to have any extra materials. They should double the ingredient carry capacity so that you can always be gathering more than what you craft, and that way you don't feel like you have to immediately go refill your bags the moment you've made meals. There is a quick bar for your consumables. You can edit this quick bar, but not everything can be taken off the bar for some reason. I don't know if it's a bug, but as long as it's on there, it's stuck there. You can consume it to get rid of it, but that's the only way. Another issue is that if you remove an item from the bar, but then you re-loot that item out in the world, it'll just automatically re-add it right back to the bar. So no matter how organized you get it, after just a few minutes of exploring, it's right back to being chaos. There are optional dialogues that just don't seem to serve any purpose. In The Witcher 3, if you had a contract that mentioned a creature that Geralt didn't know about, you can ask the townsfolk to describe it, and eventually he would come to an understanding of what they were describing as a creature is something that he knows as a different name. It would be something of that nature. But in Horizon Forbidden West, Aloy will have an optional dialogue that adds absolutely nothing to the situation. They basically just emphasize that it's a problem.
Before I head for the old growth, I might want to talk to the survivor. See what he can tell me about the Claw Strider. Is there anything you can tell me about the machine that might help?
It looked like a Claw Strider, but it was stronger.
Having optional dialogue that just tells me that a bad machine is bad is completely meaningless because it's something I knew when I accepted the quest in the first place. Optional dialogue in this game should tell you something particularly related to the component breaking mechanics that's here. It would be very cool if when you went and talked to an optional dialogue character, they could say something like, when we engaged this unit earlier, we damaged its back left leg, and then when you went into the fight, you could take advantage of that and maybe break the leg sooner. Another problem is that the levels on the quests and on the enemies just make absolutely no sense. It feels like these guys just put a bunch of levels in a Yahtzee cup and threw that out on the board. because none of it matches anything, and you have absolutely no idea how to tell what encounters are going to show up under what levels of quest. The game starts with basically giving you 3 quests that you can go do, and it says you can do them in any order, but it actually gives them levels. So there's a level 17, a level 22, and a level 24. So what did I do? I picked the level 17 quest. Made the most sense to me, right? So as I'm walking along, I just so happened to run into a quest giver, and he said something along the lines of like, I'm going to head out to this location. Do you want to go with me, or do you want to meet me there? And I just said, I'll go with you. So I didn't look at what the level of the quest was. Well, this quest ended up leading me into a humongous fight. And it was against this big creature, got my tail kicked. But when I looked at it later, I realized that this was a level 22 quest. So I was like, okay, makes sense. I was under-leveled for this. I wasn't ready. But that's my mistake for just instantly accepting this guy's offer to go with him. Well, after doing that, I was like, this level 17 quest is going to be nothing. Oh, boy, was I wrong. This level 17 quest was insane. There was a giant mammoth. It had machine guns all over it. It was mowing me down. I swear on my life, I was here for hours. I just kept dying, kept dying. Everything was one-shotting me. I even had the armor that gave me the proper resistance type against the element that the animal was using. Didn't matter. Didn't matter. I was totally underprepared. This fight was ridiculous. And I just was like, I was shocked because this was the first and the easiest, according to the list, of the 3 quests I was about to have to do. So I was scared to death of doing the 22 and the 24. So I went and did a ton of side quests between the 22 and the 24 because I knew that there's no way that I'm going to be able to beat those. Well, just to nobody's surprise here, because I've already kind of told you this, the 22 and the 24 were a joke. I smoked them. I beat both the encounters in those fights, I think, on the first try. I didn't even die. It was night and day in comparison to the first one. And you could definitely make an argument here that maybe I kind of got tempered in the fires of the first one, but I don't think so. I think it's just the nature of the encounter. And the biggest problem with these is it's about like the variety of enemies in the fights, the amount of stuff they throw at you. I don't think the developers realize that dumping a bunch of enemies on you is a very difficult encounter, especially at the higher difficulties. A single unit is much easier to manage. It reminds me of like Dark Souls with the Capra Demon. The original Capra Demon and the original Dark Souls was such a pain in the butt, not because of the demon himself, but because as you walked in the door, you got attacked by like 2 other dogs and the boss. This fight is just a ridiculous fight, and it's known as a ridiculous fight because it's just the nature of the encounter to add too many small things to deal with at once when you don't have enough tools to deal with those problems. So let's talk about some improvements here. Some other things that I kind of touched on a little bit, but we'll really go over some stuff that I think would really elevate this game. This game needs a weapon wheel that can fit at least one of every type of weapon. Now, I think it would be better if you could have multiple wheels and things like that, but this is kind of the Ratchet & Clank way where all the weapons fit on the wheel, so you can always pick from all your weapons. Right now, you can only have 6 weapons equipped, and there's more weapon types than that. So what ends up happening is immediately you got to cut certain weapons out of the order. This isn't even countering the fact that you have all kinds of different elements on different weapons that you can't change. So if you pick up a bow that has one element you like, and you picked up another bow that has another element you like, that's 2 spots on your weapon wheel. And it's just a bit unfortunate that it works that way, because I felt like there were some weapons I would have used more, but I can't prioritize them over the 6 that I picked. I think you should be able to swap out the ammo types. I know this is probably something the devs are against because they want you to change the weapons, but if they don't want you to be able to change it freely, that's fine. Give it a cost, but I should be able to do something to change it. The most obvious answer here is making it cost machine parts. I want to hunt the machines. I want a reason to engage in the combat. If they would allow you to change the ammo types at the cost of machine parts, this encourages you to participate in the gameplay loop. Maybe this would be a good resource sink for the Greenshine. Some of the abilities for the weapons really need to be tweaked, and I think the biggest issue with them is some of them just are outright better than the others, which means you're just making the wrong choice if you pick certain ones. Obviously, the difficulty you're playing at is going to influence this pretty greatly, but I believe that most players are going to come to these conclusions. The Boltcaster has the ability to just rapid fire its entire magazine in one go, which is a very good ability, but I think that makes that weapon just kind of like you start the fight with it, or you wait till somebody gets stunned, because reloading in combat with that weapon is almost impossible. There's just not enough time for you to be able to do that. So what I would suggest is for Boltcaster to have an ability that makes it to where it'll instantly reload the weapon. The Tripcaster will deploy little nodes that link together to form a trap. The Tripcaster's ability will instantly deploy a group of nodes so that you don't need to connect them. I think this works great, so great in fact that I think the weapon should work like this at default. The problem with the Tripcaster is that it's too clunky to set up for how little it does. Most enemies need to hit 2 or 3 traps in order to be affected by it, and a significant number of enemies have the ability to just completely jump over or dodge the traps entirely. It's a lot of effort to connect the nodes not knowing whether it'll even work, which is why I think it should deploy a full trap by default. There's another crowd control weapon called the Ropecaster, that if you shoot the enemy enough, it will build up this roping status, and after it's reached its maximum, it will tie the enemy to the ground and take them out of the fight for a little bit. The ability on the Ropecaster just has it launch a projectile that'll instantly add some roping status to the enemy. The comparison versus the Tripcaster here is that this ability is basically guaranteed as long as you're aiming true. If you hit the enemy, they're getting the rope down status. Even if you instant cast a Tripcaster on the ground, there's no guarantee that the enemy is going to be affected by it. This is what makes the Ropecaster a more effective weapon under these circumstances and why its ability works a little bit better. There's one weapon that once I got it, I realized it was absolutely overpowered, and it was the Drill Spike. This is a throwing weapon, and it does not work the way you think it would. The original throwing weapon works fine. You chunk it at an enemy and it explodes. Okay, it's a fine weapon. But this one, it constantly deals damage to the enemy. So you throw it, it attaches to the enemy, and it just keeps ticking for this damage over time. For whatever reason, this does not work like you think, and that damage over time seems to constantly stagger the enemy that you attach it to. If you use this weapon, you can trivialize almost the entire game. If I had this before I quit my ultra hard run, I would not have had to quit it. Because to me, this Drill Spike is easily the most powerful crowd control weapon in the game. It will completely stagger a humongous enemy to death. It doesn't make any sense. There's a bit of a problem running around the map. The small gadgets that you use to access areas. At the beginning of the game, they give you something called a Polecaster, which allows you to have different modes of traversal, but it'll also allow you to grab onto a portion of the wall and rip it out at specific locations. Well, later you get an upgrade that allows you to destroy something called Fire Gleam. That's something in the wall. You walk up to it, you click a button, it destroys the wall. And then later you get something else to destroy these Iron Flowers. You walk up to it, you click it, it destroys the wall. So hang on a second. The Polecaster, the Fire Gleam Destroyer, and the Iron Flower all just destroy walls? Yes, they all do the exact same thing. If they just made it to where it was an upgrade for the Polecaster, it would be absolutely no different. It's all the same. You just destroy walls. It's just a variety of animations. And I get that. Maybe they just wanted to mix up the animations a little bit so it's not as boring. And that's fine. I do get that. But if you recognize that that's all you're doing, it feels very boring. It's not a unique gadget. And it doesn't change the way that you traverse the world at all. Despite all of the negatives that I just went through, I still really enjoyed this game. There are so many good things going for it with the combat and the exploration that I think you'd be crazy to not play this if you like this type of game. The story's good, it's nothing to write home about, but it's enjoyable enough to keep you engaged.
What's next? Wizards? From the moon?
And most of the world building is very top-notch. To top it all off, there's actually a new Game Plus mode, so if you really like the game, you can go and play it all over again. A lot of games these days don't live up to the hype, and although Horizon Forbidden West has its fair share of problems, if you're looking for a fun game, I would recommend it.